I do thank you. And I do thank you, Amal, for joining us today and for accepting our invitation. Amal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosette. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in today's timely webinar. We're really grateful and value very much our partnership with INIA under the leadership of Professor Marvin Formosa. And I'll ask you to excuse me, it's still 7 a.m. in New York, so I'll try my best. And last night was the presidential election, so everyone was up really late. Also, my virtual background, this is what the view looks like from my office, because as with most colleagues around the world, we've been working from home. And today's topic is really very dear to us, and this will be the first time that I actually discuss it and share this information. This is the research that my team and I have undertaken in the past few months, and that have submitted through the Secretary General to the government represented in the General Assembly in the current 75th session, which just started. So it's, you know, fresh out of the oven, as they say. So I'm also grateful to Christian for arranging the session, much appreciated, and to Rosette for moderating. And if you'd be kind enough to show the slides, we could get started. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Rosette. And for colleagues, we'll be more than happy to share the slides with the organizers with you, as well as the original document, which has the sources, especially when it comes to data and studies. So if anyone's interested, you can look further into it. Yeah, so the topic that we decided to focus on this year, since we produce these reports to the General Assembly on an annual basis, and over the past few years, we decided to zoom in on a specific theme each year. Last year was on older persons in humanitarian settings, and this year we focused on population, aging, longevity, and the future of work. Next slide, please. So just to give you a good idea of who we are, we're basically the focal point on aging issues in the United Nations system worldwide. What we do is we try to integrate, you know, older persons and the promotion and protection of their rights as part of the development agendas and policies. And we also service intergovernmental processes that take place here in New York in collaboration with civil society, academia, and national human rights institutions. On the slides, which I hope would be shared with you later on, you could email us or visit our website, which has a wealth of information, or follow us on Twitter. Next slide, please. So what do we do at the UN? We service the UN General Assembly, as you can see, specifically the third committee. This is where the material that I'm about to present has been shared with member states. As Rosette said, we also service the open-ended working group, which Professor Marvin attends in New York, that focuses on promoting and protecting the rights of older persons. We have 2 international days that we organize, and we also, in parallel on the left side of the screen, we service the Economic and Social Council, specifically the Commission for Social Development. This is where the Madrid International Plan of Action follow-up takes place. We also take part in the Statistics Commission. This is through the Titchfield Group. That's a voluntary group that's working of national statistics offices that are working on aging-related statistics and age disaggregated data. We also lead a UN interagency group on aging. We have 19 UN agencies around the world that are members in it. We produce briefing papers, we hold expert meetings, we do technical cooperation work, and one we would have implemented next month in partnership with INIA in Africa. However, due to the circumstances, it was postponed till next year. And every now and then, we just release out newsletters with updates. Next slide, please. So before I get started with our subject area, of course, you know, the biggest thing that kept us busy lately was the pandemic and its impact on older persons. The UN agencies worked together to produce this, which was released by the Secretary General himself, particularly on the impact of COVID on older persons. On this link, you will find it's a one-stop, one-shop site that we put together that has loads of information, including the video message from the Secretary General, his policy brief that you see here, and various technical guidance and statements and websites and data that's been produced by the UN system worldwide, all available on this website should you be interested in getting any information on COVID-19 and older persons. Next slide, please. Can we get the next slide, please, if possible? Thank you. The joys of technology, while it allows people from all over the world to connect, you know, there's hardly ever an incident without a little hiccup.
The joys of live television. I think what happened is that somehow they got disconnected at INIA.
Let me try then, and yeah, I'm unable to share the screen. So I'll just continue until
Yes, I think that's would be best.
Perhaps our colleagues will connect again. So what I did want to say is that you know, of course, tomorrow will be the International Day of Older Persons, and I've placed the link to the website that has the events that are taking place both in New York and in Geneva. I see that the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging, our dear colleague and friend Sylvia Perel-Levine, who's organizing a high-level event in Geneva. Also, you'll find the link to their event on our website, and we encourage you to join. The theme will be on the pandemics and do they change how we address age and aging. And then I would have shared with you, you know, what the content of the presentation is today, which is really, you know, we're starting to change our approach to how we discuss issues related to aging and older persons in the UN into telling a story. We feel that that connects way better with delegates. So in telling the story today, I'll be, you know, quickly going over the aging of the world's people, the concept of decent work for all, population aging and future realities of work, the economic impact on population aging. Is it really a burden? We're challenging that mindset, and we go through specific examples of emerging multi-generational labor force, older entrepreneurs, labor force participation of older persons, and we discuss older persons in the informal economy. We also address the economic security of older persons, touching on diversity in old age, the need to remove barriers and to improve access to social protection. And I'll wrap up with key takeaways and what we have recommended for governments to do. I don't know, is Christian back? No, not yet. Okay, so what you would have, if I may just quickly, Marvin, I don't know if anyone other than Christian can give me access to share my screen.
Yeah,
perhaps
so yes, what happened was that for the first time in 25 years, we have a power cut at the Institute.
Oh my gosh.
I'm at home. So luckily I'm at home and not at the Institute like last week, so I can make you host.
Thank you.
In this way you can share. Sorry about this.
No worries at all. That's totally fine. That's perfect. Thank you. Can you see my screen, Marvin?
I can, yes.
So excellent. So, you know, all of you already know that we are experiencing unprecedented aging in the world's population. And here We've collected data from the World Population Prospects that's undertaken by our colleagues in the Population Division at DESA. The recent revision is 2019, and we looked at, the 2019 numbers projected to 2030, which is the target date for the Sustainable Development Goals, and pushed through with the estimates to 2050. Particularly, I divided it into the regional commissions of the UN because, as some of you might know, next year, the fourth review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action kickstarts at the national level. So we kind of collected the data in that number. But once we share the document with you, you'll see the database with all the figures, and you can play around with and pull out whatever figures you'd like with different groupings globally or at the national level. And of course, you see the significant increase in number and in pace when it comes to the Asia Pacific region and their projections here. All right, before we decided to embark on this research, we actually reached out to our colleagues at ILO and we asked them, do you think it's worth looking into the future of work and older persons? And they said yes, because despite the work that's been done in the Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work and its focus on being a human-centered approach, really there wasn't this comprehensive analysis when it comes to older persons. So we decided to pick this up and sort of tell the story of what the future of work would look like for older people. So today's global trends underscore the need to seize the moment and unleash new potential and provide credible responses for progress towards the well-being, inclusion, equality, and also economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. And our capacity to understand how different emerging trends affect one another is key to help governments prepare for the future of work. Of course, we cannot, have this discussion without looking into the COVID-19 crisis, because it's exposed a lot of existing inequalities in the realm of work. And it kind of capsulated us into a future that demands that we rethink the labor market and provide an opportunity to harness the potential of longevity and to benefit from the participation of older persons on the path to economic recovery from COVID-19. Sorry, let's move to the next slide. So the economic impact on population aging, is it a burden? I mean, from all the documents that we've seen that member states have submitted in the high level political forum, when they do reflect on older persons and the economy, it's mostly viewed as a burden. So, as policymakers look for ways to address the impact of population aging on standards of living and the sustainability of public programs, that's mostly how they address it. They tend to rely on a prevailing model used for age-based accounting of economic flows, because we wanted to see why are they seeing it this way. So in that model, older persons are categorized as a dependent, with the assumption that all people of the chronological age of 60 to 65 and over consume more resources than they produce through their own labor. So as a result, population aging is often depicted as a challenge to economic progress and to the sustainability of public expenditure, and older persons are therefore seen as an economic burden. We're challenging that. Why? Because we believe that such analysis is rooted in a fixed image of what old age looks like, and on assumptions based on current labor force participation rates. We also believe that chronological age alone is often a poor proxy of the level of dependency experienced in a population, and not all persons of traditional work age are actually active in the labor force. Indeed, some of them are economically dependent and on their older parents. So as irreversible as population aging is, our thinking is that its economic consequences are not predetermined if governments take up appropriate policies. if you're still doubting, and really our approach in the Secretary General report is not to talk at member states, but to talk to them, we feel that sharing specific data helps kind of make this more evidence-based. So last year, the Asian Development Bank highlighted that with significant investments in educational attainment across the Asia-Pacific region, most economies are expecting increases in human capital even as their population is aging. And in OECD, giving older workers best opportunities to work. Sorry, I'm trying to admit people while talking. Let me go back. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, giving in the countries of the OECD, giving older workers the best opportunities to work would actually raise their GDP by capita by 19% over the next 3 decades. And most interestingly, in the US, in 2018, people aged 50 years and over contributed $8.3 trillion to the economic activity of the US. That's equal to 40% of their GDP. If older people in the US were a country, their economy would come third, following the US and China. And it supports 88.6 million jobs. And these numbers are estimated to grow as the millennials in the US start joining the 50+ category. And that's in just a decade. Okay, so we then dive into more specific examples to share. And one of them is the emerging multi-generational global labor force that really still needs to be understood, not just from an ethical and social perspective, but also as an economic aspect that could contribute to society as a whole. So ARP, OECD, and the World Economic Forum launched an initiative called Living, Learning, and Earning Longer. We actually held a meeting in February earlier this year on that with the former president of the General Assembly. And they engaged around 100 global employers in discussions about the changing workforce. And their preliminary findings showed that employers with age-inclusive workforce policies are more resilient and better positioned to be more successful in a competitive environment. So the business people are sold on this. And a recent survey that this initiative did, covering 1,700 global companies, found that 86% of the corporate executives did identify multi-generational workforce as valuable to their success and growth. But when we did a global cross-industry survey of the businesses, only 8% of their diversity and inclusion policies included age. So while they're open to the idea, they see the value of it, we still don't see the policies in place within these corporations. Then we decided to look into older persons and entrepreneurship. You know, most of the discussions on entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship in New York is almost a no-brainer on youth, you know, really heavily focused on youth. So we decided to look into, you know, older people. And we found out some pretty interesting findings. It's more of a youth issue? Nope, not really. Sorry, admitting someone in. So entrepreneurs aged 50 to 80 make up a sizable proportion of all entrepreneurs worldwide and tend to start businesses at a rate that's actually comparable and or even higher than younger entrepreneurs aged 18 to 29. Do youth do it better? Not really. Older entrepreneurs aged between 65 and 80 are slightly more likely to employ 5 or more people, whereas the younger entrepreneurs are on average slightly more likely to be running a non-employer business. And older entrepreneurs are also far less likely than other age groups to discontinue a business because of financial challenges. Social entrepreneurship is only associated with youth? No. Findings point to the fact that people aged 65, between 65 and 80 are slightly more likely to be social entrepreneurs than entrepreneurs in the other 3 age groups that were researched: 18 to 29, 30 to 49, and 50 to 64. All right. So we then, after looking into the multi-generational workforce, older people, and entrepreneurship, we decided to look at what does the labor force participation trends look like for older people. So we could see here, this is a distribution of the world's labor force by age group between 1990 and 2030 in percentage. So I'm just admitting people. And it's based on the ILO stat database, the July 2019 edition. So the data is pretty recent. And you can see that the impact aging has is already visible on the labor force participation trends. And employment rates among older persons at the global level have increased in recent decades. And the share of older persons aged 65 and over in the labor force has increased and is estimated to continue this upward trend at a faster pace in the near future. Now, for the workforce aged 55 years and over, the increase in participation will persist despite the decline in overall global labor force participation rate in the next decade. And of course, the potential impact of COVID-19 on the global economy could significantly change these trends. And our colleagues at ILO are keeping an eye on this. This next graph is on labor force participation rates by sex. And we went for country income level because that felt like it made more sense than the regional grouping for the age group 55 to 64. And the rise in the labor force participation for workers 55 and over at the global level masks variations that member states really need to take into account when adopting policies towards promoting participation of older persons in the labor market. That's why we kind of broke it down by the country's economic level. And the data at the regional level show that increases are mainly driven in the Asia Pacific, the Americas, Europe, and Central Asia. So in other words, in regions that have larger proportions of older persons. Now, this last slide on labor force participation trends looks at the trends, the rates disaggregated by sex, by country income level, but now we're looking at the age group 65 years and older. And for both older men and older women aged 65 and over, data disaggregated by country income group show that while labor force participation rates for both men and women have increased, it's projected to continue an upward trend until 2030 in high income countries. The labor force participation rate in all other country income groups will decline, except for women in the upper middle income countries. So after we covered the multi-generational workforce, we talked about older entrepreneurs, we looked at labor force participation rates for older persons, we decided to look into older persons and the informal economy. And again, we feel that a lot of the discussion that takes place on the informal economy in the UN headquarters tends to focus on youth. So we looked at the most recent data that's available and find what, while it's more prevalent in developing country settings, informality exists in all countries, regardless of their socioeconomic development. And in 2018, around 2 billion people, representing over 60% of the world's employed population, were indeed in informal employment. The level of informal employment varies significantly over the life course, and worldwide, 3 out of 4 older people are in the informal employment. And entrance into informal economy is often not by choice, but rather the result of the lack of opportunities in the formal economy and the absence of other means of livelihood owing to, the lack of benefits provided by pension systems. And as a result, older people have to work well into their old age to sustain themselves and in many cases to also sustain their families. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry, I don't know how to go backwards except to leave the screen and go back in. Okay, So you'll also see that we broke it down by regions here to look at the share of informal employment of persons age 65 and over by sex and region. You could see, for example, in Africa, you know, it's 96%. So that's pretty high, and member states should really take a close look at this to consider their policies moving forward, which for now, as we see, is heavily focused on youth and not enough, in our opinion, on older persons. Now, against the backdrop of you know, COVID-19 and the gender inequalities, we saw you know, a lot of labor market disruptions because of COVID-19. Of course, it's affected all kinds of categories of workers, but particularly it's affected informal workers. And according to our colleagues at ILO, the gender gap in the proportion of informal workers in sectors that have been hit hard is far greater, with 42% of women working informally in those sectors at the onset of the crisis in comparison to 32% of men. So, you know, older, you know, women, and as women age, older women will be affected disproportionately. And of course, at the same time, we know that the increased burden of unpaid care brought by the crisis affects women more than men. Now, what about the notion of decent work when it comes to the informal economy? So decent work deficits are more pronounced in the informal economy, and there are new data, new indicators of informality that reveal that in the absence of effective policies, the vulnerability experienced by informal economy workers will not only affect them, but will also be passed on to their families, particularly children and older persons who disproportionately live in households that are engaged in the informal economy, mostly in developing countries. So we then move to discussing the economic security for older persons, because we really can't talk about or envisage what the future of work would look like without addressing that. And here we cover, you know, diversity in old age, you know, removing barriers, and the social protection conversation. We really took our time in discussing diversity in old age because we feel like it feeds into so many issues that relate to older persons. Face it, older people are different. Sorry, this is bad English from my part. What I'm trying to say is not all older people are the same. If I ask you all to take a moment to think of an older person and we discuss who did we visualize, it'll be different. Am I thinking of an older person with disability who's being cared for? Am I thinking of Ida Keeling, a lady that I met a couple of years ago who was over 100 years at the time and was a sprinter? I mean, they're very different. And to harness population aging for economic progress, we must challenge assumptions and stereotypes on what old age is. And centered to this is acknowledging the diversity and that it's a defining characteristic of old age. So the heterogeneity among older persons is observed in their needs, in their capacities, in their preferences, which is rarely addressed because we kind of assume what's good for them, and also in the health and economic status of older persons, suggesting that a successful response to population aging and longevity must be multifaceted. It can't be just a tea bag kind of solution. Intersecting forms of discrimination experienced by persons at all stages of their lives, including gender and disability, are crucial to understanding what old age looks like. For example, as it relates to work, we know that the legal coverage of pensions for women is at 64%, which is lower than that of the total population. And last year, the World Bank Group launched a study that was conducted in 190 economies that showed discriminatory laws continue to threaten women's work-life balance and career growth. So even when measuring formal laws and regulations that give women the ability to work or have their own business, on average, women only have 3/4 of the legal rights afforded to men. In the region where I come from, the Middle East and North Africa, women have half the rights of men when it comes to formal laws and regulations as relates to work or having their own business. And persons with disabilities also, we would have had the 11th session of the General Assembly's Working Group on the protection and promotion of the rights of older persons in New York earlier this year, but because of COVID, we didn't. In any case, one of the themes was the right to work, and member states, shared with us examples of what they have done in that relation. And we found that while many governments have taken measures that require employers to make reasonable adjustments to include workers with disabilities, this requirement may not necessarily apply to older workers experiencing diminished intrinsic capacities and functional abilities that just do not meet the disability criteria. So we can't assume that anything that's done for persons with disabilities will naturally cover older persons with disabilities. And remember, persons with disabilities themselves are also aging. So in the field of work, acknowledging diversity in old age entails putting in place systems that support older persons who are unable or choose not to work, while enabling others who can and wish to work to continue doing so. And in such systems, older persons are able to navigate and choose, future transitions with freedom from fear and from insecurity. And what is crucial for the future of work are strong and responsive protection systems based on the principles of solidarity and risk sharing, which provide support to meet older persons' needs over the life course. Otherwise, they really would not have that right to make those choices. And we'll talk a little bit more about protection systems soon. Removing barriers. So whatever the circumstance, in order for older persons to remain economically active, policies must remove barriers to their participation in the labor market while protecting their right to freely choose whether to work and providing opportunities to extend employability. And we found that the barriers for the full participation of older persons in employment are multiple, and they reflect attitudes, they reflect legislation, and even institutions of work. So age-based discrimination in employment manifests itself in the form of ageist individual, institutional, systemic, or structural practices. And the coexistence of variables with such as gender and disability actually exacerbate it. So ageism is real and it's measurable. A recent study in the US exploring the economic cost of age discrimination in the workplace showed that in 2018, a potential lift of more than 5% in GDP, that's $850 billion, was forgone because older workers aged 50 and over were not given the opportunity to remain or re-enter the labor force, switch jobs, or be promoted within their existing companies. With removing barriers as well, some governments talk about extending work lives. So we believe that offering flexible and part-time work arrangements, which we find that they're highly valued by older workers, as well as exploiting the potential of new digital technologies, including robotics and artificial intelligence, to support employment among older persons can incentivize older workers to extend their working lives. Now, while ICTs have become ever present in the economic and social life, especially in the context of COVID, in both developed and developing countries, digital divides continue to prevent ICTs from achieving their full development potential, particularly in the least developed countries. So the older persons and other groups are often left behind. Raising the retirement age, it's not that simple. When policymakers consider changes to retirement ages, measures should acknowledge and reflect the diversity that characterizes old age. So given the widening gap in life expectancy by socioeconomic status, sorry, let me admit someone in. Reforms to social security systems geared towards changing retirement ages should be mindful of the impact of socioeconomic disparities on life expectancy, as well as individual health status, to ensure that those who cannot continue working have guaranteed access to adequate pension. Of course, in discussing removing barriers, we must address unpaid care work. The participation of older persons in insecure and low productivity work or informal employment, which we saw where the figures were high, is also a barrier to decent work. Often when you look at unpaid care work, they talk about people caring for older persons, whereas a lot of older persons themselves provide, that care. So unpaid care work, often performed by women, can also be a barrier to participation of older workers in the formal labor market. And according to data from the UK, people aged 50 and over who provide 10 or more hours of care per week are more likely to leave formal employment. Furthermore, hours devoted to care work increase with the age of the caregiver. And it's important to keep up with reality. So promoting the inclusion of older persons in the new realities of work and harnessing the opportunity provided by expansion of longevity, people are living longer, requires policymakers to directly address all the above barriers that we discussed. Such policies will be contingent on the level and availability of social protection systems, access to healthcare and other public services, and the labor market structures of each country. So while improving access to social protection has been discussed, by others in far more depth, we couldn't really tell the story without touching on it. So the key messages that we touch is diversity. The great diversity among older persons means that while many will be able and willing to continue working above retirement ages, for many older adults, this will not be an option. And the life course approach, because where a life course approach to social protection is implemented, people are more likely to reach old age in better conditions in terms of economic security, health, and social inclusion. And don't forget, it's a human right. Although debates around social protection in the context of population aging often revolve around financial sustainability of pension systems, it is important that we remind everyone that this right is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And data point to a positive trend in legal and effective coverage. Old age pensions are the most widespread form of social protection around the globe, with around 68% of people above retirement age who do receive a pension. But let's be very careful, because it's important to note that there are still acute regional variations. Access to universal and equitable healthcare is also key. Throughout the life course, access to healthcare, including disease prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, would promote healthy aging and improve health outcomes in old age. As a result, the burden of non-communicable diseases could be reduced so that old age is lived in better health and older persons can remain active for longer. Long-term care services will become very important as population ages, yet few social protection systems have schemes focused on such needs. And long-term services are largely overlooked by policymakers, both in less and more developed countries. And dear God, we've seen examples and stories of that on the news in the context of COVID-19. So the COVID-19 crisis, as I just mentioned, has shed light on the importance of establishing strong social protection systems that support and strengthen the resilience of the entire population. And while the risks linked to inadequate and insufficient social protection systems have been exposed worldwide, such vulnerabilities have particularly been felt in less developed countries. So what are the key takeaways? Checking the time, yeah. So life as we know it is going to change. So let me admit someone in. Emerging trends, including population aging, will have profound consequences for every aspect of individual, community, national, and international life, where every facet of humanity, including social and economic aspects, is going to evolve. People are living longer than ever. So reaping the benefits of longevity demands the adoption of evidence-based policies that incorporate the extension of longevity and re-examine existing attitudinal, legislative, and institutional labor structures. What we have today basically won't do, because current underlying societal and policy structures that support the long-standing assumptions of life in 3 stages, you know, we have our full-time education, then we have work, then we have retirement, they just do not align with the realities of population aging and extended longevity. No more age group silo mentality. It's about people throughout their lives. When governments are so keen in investing in children and in youth and in people at the working age, sometimes they fail to realize that those are the exact same persons who will grow older. So a comprehensive policy response should support a broader life course approach that promotes quality of life at all stages and secures the benefits associated with longevity. And finally, changing the paradigm that we operate in. I mean, it's starting to become a no-brainer. Countries will need to review the concept of population aging and what old age looks like, shifting from a depiction of older persons as a homogeneous group and population aging as a burden on societies to a forward-thinking view that recognizes the social and economic contributions. And my colleague Sylvia from the NGO Committee on Aging in Geneva told me, no more contributions. We're talking about participation of older persons, and that embraces the potential of an aging population as a basis for future development. And the UN is starting at the high levels, are starting to see that. That's why you'll see tomorrow the Secretary General has a message. The President of the General Assembly has a message. In Geneva, the heads of WHO, OHCHR, and UNFPA have messages. They clearly see how this is the basis for future development. Now, what did we provide as recommendations for governments to do? 8 things. Ensure that social protection systems, including access to long-term care protection, are equitable and universal and adequate and follow a life course approach. Achieve economic security in old age and address the adverse impact of discrimination and inequalities experienced during the life course by older persons, in particular women. Enable persons to reach old age in better economic conditions and having them shift from informal to formal work, and value the economic contribution of unpaid care work, particularly of older persons. So we want that disaggregated by age. Adopt measures that combat age-based discrimination and really look at and correct those damaging stereotypes that people have in mind when it comes to older people and their ability to learn and work and grow. And we touched on the importance, which brings us to lifelong learning systems that enables people to acquire new skills, to upskill, to reskill throughout their life course. Otherwise, they wouldn't be relevant anymore. And UNESCO actually published a new study, a new report, and in it they talk about the real lack of funding when it comes to adult learning, and in some cases, in some countries, it actually decreased. Provide incentives encouraging employers to retain and hire older workers to promote good practices in managing and harnessing an age-diverse workforce, and encourage longer and more satisfying careers, and by offering what people prefer to do in old age. And finally, promote self-employment among older persons and support older entrepreneurs. I hope this was useful. I know it was a lot to take in. We'll be sharing with all of you the document itself with all the resources, should be interested in specific areas to dig in further. And click on the last slide. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Abou Rafeh. Thank you, Amal. It was quite a tour de force, to be honest with you, because you really, well, I can't say you hit the nail on its head. I have to say you hit so many nails on their head. I quite enjoyed it, and it reminded me of the famous quip by Mark Zuckerberg that young people are smart, when he was asked why why so many young people work at Silicon Valley in California. But of course, Mr. Zuckerberg missed his lesson at school on ageism and age discrimination, because we all know very clearly that many older people do not work because of the obstacles and of the difficulties that society throw in their face. Right, we do have about 10 minutes where we can open the floor. Any questions or comments from the floor? What I ask you is to keep it short and perhaps simple, due to the online mechanism of trying to understand each other and each other's accents. Please.
In the meantime, I just wanted to share the information for tomorrow's event. Sorry. I'm not particularly good at this. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Avinash, do you want to make a comment or a question? I've seen you've put you put two comments in the chat section. Avinash. Right, perhaps I'll ask a question. To what extent do you think that the commercial world is prepared for such an upsurge in the numbers of older persons? Because I still think that, apart from the people here whom we tend to meet all the time, when I venture outside this specific circle of professionals, it seems that the rest of the world is still burying its head in the sand. And they are always surprised when I mention, what we learn on day one, that the percentages and the numbers of older persons will increase exponentially in the coming 2, mostly 3 decades.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Marvin. I mean, it's still an uphill battle to have this conversation. Our team tries to stay clear away from, although I am a demographer, from numbers and figures. And when we do refer to older persons, we go for the total numbers, as you could see from my charts, not percentages. Because in our work, and we feed directly into policymaking, we want it to be a reminder that it's about people and not just figures. However, policymakers do respond to numbers. So it was only until the projections showed that the number of older people worldwide in 2018 globally already outnumbered children under the age of 5, and that by 2030, there'll be more people aged 60 years and over than youth worldwide. That kind of rang the alarm, for everyone to take a look at this. But our perspective to this is that, if there were, a handful of older people, they still deserve the right to grow older in dignity. So that's one part of it. So, yes, we emphasize the population aging, but we also want to keep it more of a humane discussion. And another approach is to also make it something that has policy sense, right? So for governments that do not want to invest in older persons, that feel that they are, a burden, then by all means, stop investing in vaccines for children, or in, training for youth, or in jobs and healthcare for women or people at the working age. Because what you're doing with your policies that you care so much about for those age groups is you're allowing those people to grow older and to live in older ages longer. So you've succeeded, and now you're looking at your success and you're like, yeah, I don't want to deal with this. It makes no policy sense. So just to flag to, the governments that this is a life course approach, that this baby that you care so much about is the person that will age. And one of the tricky things about ageism, and our colleagues at WHO are going to very soon release a global report on combating ageism, which is really well done and well researched. We're all going to age. I mean, the only other option is to die. So it's not something that you can live your life through without experiencing, such as racism and sexism. It touches all of us. But part of it is also facing old age and mortality and how we think about it. So I could see why people in society just don't want to deal with it and would rather look at children and say, oh, look at youth and say, yes, that's so promising for the future, and not view older persons like that. So what we've tried to do is give some economic sense to this to governments, and not just do the ethical conversation, but really show by figures. And you'll see that, yeah, we've leaned in heavily to figures from OECD, from the Asian Development Bank, from AARP in the US, because that's where the numbers are. But at least those figures, show that, I mean, in the US, the contribution of older people to the economy is immense, So when they talk about COVID-19 and lockdown and, oh my God, it's only affecting older people, these older people are holding the society together, contributing to doing that. So there's a lot of convincing to do, and the engagement of the World Economic Forum in this initiative was really great. We had, it involved big companies, global companies, and they're crunching the numbers. It's all data-based and not just preaching. And hopefully once this report is out, we'll be able to share it as evidence-based for policymakers.
Yes, wise words indeed. So we have to close this webinar. We have received a number of questions in the chat. We'll try to address them electronically or through email or next time perhaps. But I would like to say a big thank you to Amal, to Ms. Amal, and thank you for waking up so early. Well, most probably you have woken up at the same time, because I know that you're a very industrious person and you send me emails very early in the morning, your time. But anyhow, thank you for preparing the slides and approaching this webinar with the usual efficiency and professionality that you are known for. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of the second webinar session. I'm very sorry that we had that very minor mishap. We had, for some reason, there was a power cut in the building. It was, it's the whole area experienced this power cut. And these things happen, and unfortunately, they always happen at the wrong moments. But anyhow, we anticipated some possible issues, so that's why we were working from different areas. And
that's resilience in action, Dr. Marvin.
Yes, we. Okay. I wish you a very good afternoon or good day, depending on the time zones you are in, and we'll meet next week, same time. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Stay safe. Bye.
Yeah.